My name is Georgina Burke, and if you have ever sat across a beautifully set table from the people who share your DNA, only to realize they are the greatest threat to your peace of mind, then pull up a chair. Get yourself a cup of coffee. We need to talk. I'm 34 years old, and for a living, I edit other people's writing for Carolina Builder Quarterly. My job is to take long, dense sentences from architects and structural engineers, stripping away the clutter until the words say exactly what they mean and nothing more. I like precision. I like structural integrity. I spent a long time believing that families possessed a similar kind of internal support system, a hidden framework that kept everything from collapsing when the storm rolled in. I was wrong. Let's go back to that Saturday morning, May 2nd, 2026, in Charlotte, North Carolina. It was a remarkably beautiful day. 74 degrees, clear skies, the kind of southern spring morning where the air feels light and the shadows are crisp. I was standing in my mother's kitchen in Myers Park. It's a large, pristine room featuring custom marble countertops, high-end copper cookware that rarely sees actual fire, and a quiet, suffocating atmosphere of perfection. My sister, Vanessa, stepped through the back door. She was wearing a perfectly coordinated Lululemon outfit, her hair secured in a sleek, athletic ponytail that made her look entirely unbothered by the world. In her right hand, she carried an empty, crumpled Target shopping bag. She didn't look panicked. She didn't look out of breath. She walked over to the marble island, tossed the empty plastic bag onto the counter, and gave me a very specific, subtle, familiar smirk, a sharp, cutting twist of her lips that I had seen since we were children sharing a bedroom. "Oops," she said, her voice trailing off into a light, sing-song drawl. "I left Ellie at Target. Take a breath with me right there. Let that sink in." Ellie is my 5-year-old daughter. She is small, quiet, and she was wearing a daisy print dress that morning because she had decided days earlier that her great-grandfather's upcoming birthday celebration required the presence of daisies. Vanessa had volunteered to take her to the South Park Target just 30 minutes prior, promising to let her pick out a gift for Pop Pop. And now she was standing in our mother's kitchen, empty-handed, treating the disappearance of a toddler like a misplaced set of car keys. Before my brain could even process the words, before the primal protective panic could claw its way up my throat, a sound echoed from the breakfast nook. It was my mother, Diane. She didn't gasp. She didn't reach for her phone. Instead, my mother let out a sharp, delighted laugh, a sound of pure, unadulterated satisfaction that chilled me to the absolute bone. She set her coffee cup down and looked at Vanessa, completely ignoring the fact that I was standing less than 4 feet away. "Good," my mother said, her voice smooth and deliberate. "That child has been monopolizing your grandfather's affection far too long. Perhaps now she'll learn she is not the center of this family. If you've ever had to earn your place in your own family, if you've ever felt like your safety was conditional on how useful you were to the people in charge, type the word boundaries in the comments right now. Because in that exact fraction of a second, the illusion of my family shattered completely. I didn't scream. I didn't lung at my sister, and I didn't waste my breath arguing with a mother who viewed my daughter's abandonment as a structural correction to the family hierarchy. My training as an editor kicked in. When a sentence is broken, you don't argue with the paper. You fix the structure. I picked up my car keys, grabbed my purse, and walked down the long, carpeted hallway toward the guest powder room. I stepped inside, closed the heavy wooden door, and turned the lock. What my mother and sister could not possibly comprehend was that my daughter wasn't just a defenseless child wandering a massive retail store. They didn't know that my grandmother, Beatrice, in the final, agonizing summer of her life, had already anticipated this exact brand of betrayal. They thought they were playing a cruel game to humble me and my child. They didn't realize they had just tripped a silent wire that would dismantle their entire financial and social future. I took out my phone, breathed through my nose to keep my hands perfectly steady, and made one single phone call. I stood inside that locked powder room, staring at my reflection in the ornate gold-framed mirror my mother had imported from Europe. My face was completely pale, but my hands were utterly, unnervingly still. If you have ever been the person who has to be the anchor because everyone else in your life is a storm, you know exactly what that stillness feels like. You don't cry. You don't panic. Your brain simply clicks into a cold, terrifying clarity. To understand why my mother smiled when my 5-year-old daughter was left stranded at a Target, you have to understand the specific architecture of manipulation that built our family. My mother, Diane Carrington, has always known how to say things that sound like love, but operate like marching orders. She is a master of the soft language of cruelty. Ever since I was 6 years old, she called me the sturdy one. Georgie is so sturdy, she'd tell the neighbors, smiling over her Wedgwood china. When I was 22, she was still using that word. I used to take it as a compliment. I thought it meant she saw me as capable, reliable, resilient. I didn't realize it was an insult until the summer before I got married, when my grandmother, Beatrice Holloway, explained it to me at her kitchen sink. My grandmother was washing a heavy coffee mug, her hands moving slowly through the soapy water. Without turning around, she said, "Georgie, your mother calls you sturdy because she needs you to carry her weight without complaint. Do not let her." But I did let her. I kept letting her for 12 more years. I carried the weight because that's what sturdy daughters do. My sister, Vanessa, was 2 years younger than me, and her label was entirely different. Vanessa was fragile. In my mother's vocabulary, fragile is the word used for women who are never expected to grow up. Women who are allowed to damage everything around them and leave the cleanup to someone else. When Vanessa was 3, she smashed a priceless antique vase my grandmother had owned since 1969. My mother didn't scold her. She turned to me, a 5-year-old child, and told me it was my fault for not watching my sister properly. When Vanessa was 9, she crept into my room while I was sleeping and cut off 4 inches of my hair. My mother merely sighed and said it would grow back. When Vanessa was 15, she plagiarized a paper I had written, and when the school caught her, my mother drove down there in a fury. Not to discipline Vanessa, but to defend her. Through all of it, Vanessa never once apologized. She didn't have to. My mother had already constructed a narrative where I was the difficult, unyielding one, and Vanessa was the perpetual victim who just needed grace. Then came March of 2022. My husband, Reed Burke, was riding his bicycle home from his office on East Boulevard. He was a gentle man with deep brown eyes and the slow, infinite patience of someone who grew up as the youngest of 4 brothers. An SUV ran a red light. There was no malice in it, no grand evil plan, just pure, unadulterated human carelessness. But the result was a permanent fracture in my world. Our daughter, Ellie, was only a year and a half old. I remember standing in the quiet, sterile hallway of the funeral home, holding my baby girl tightly against my chest. I didn't shed a single tear during the visitation. Do you want to know why? Because Ellie was crying, her tiny hands clutching my collar, and one of us had to be the floor. One of us had to be solid enough to hold her up. My mother arrived at the funeral home 20 minutes late. She stayed exactly 22 minutes. I know because I counted. I have always counted the minutes. She checked her watch, leaned in, and whispered that she had to leave because Vanessa was having a really difficult time processing the breakup she was going through. My husband was in a casket, my child was fatherless, and my sister's romantic drama was the priority. My grandmother, however, didn't leave. She stayed in my guest room for 4 straight days. Every morning she would fry eggs, place the plate in front of me, and sit there in absolute silence, watching me until I swallowed every single bite. My grandfather sent a check that paid my mortgage for the next 3 months. No card, no phone call, no demand for gratitude. He just did it because he knew I needed a floor. My mother sent a card. Inside it simply said, "Love, Mom." No comma between the words, no signature, just a pre-printed sentiment used to fulfill an obligation. Type sturdy in the comments if you've ever been the one forced to carry the emotional weight of an entire family while your own grief was treated like an inconvenience. Because that was the moment I realized that, in the eyes of my mother and sister, I wasn't loved. I was just useful. And the moment my daughter Ellie began to inherit the deep, unyielding affection of my grandfather, she transitioned from a non-entity in their eyes into an active threat to their position. They needed to break her the way they broke me. They just didn't realize that my grandmother had left behind a blueprint to stop them. I pressed my phone tightly to my ear inside that locked powder room, listening to the hollow ring echoing through the line. My mother and sister were just down the hall, likely sharing another laugh, completely unaware that the walls of their carefully constructed world were about to cave in. When you spend 34 years dealing with people who manipulate reality for a living, you learn to keep an emergency escape route mapped out in your mind. My mother always told me my meticulous planning was a sign of a neurotic, paranoid personality. But my grandmother Beatrice had known better. I didn't call the police first, and I didn't call my sister's cell phone to beg her to turn the car around. I dialed a number I had quietly memorized 2 years prior, the direct customer service desk for the South Park Target store. A woman answered, her voice bright, clear, and perfectly ordinary. "Target South Park, how can I help you?" "My name is Georgina Burke," I said, my voice dropping into that low, flat editing register where every syllable is precise. "My 5-year-old daughter, Eleanor Burke, is currently somewhere inside your store. She was brought there by her aunt approximately 2 hours ago, and the aunt has just returned home without her. I am exactly 8 miles away. Please tell me she is safe." The line went dead silent for a fraction of a second, the cashier's customer service cheer instantly evaporating. "Ma'am, please hold," she said urgently. As the mechanical hold music began to play, my mind drifted back to a hot afternoon in July of 2024, just a month before my grandmother passed away. I remembered sitting at her small kitchen table while she adjusted a new GPS tracking watch onto Ellie's tiny wrist. My mother had laughed at the watch later that evening, calling it ridiculous and asking if a 4-year-old was going to use it to dial a pizza parlor. But my grandmother had looked at me with immense gravity and whispered, "Georgie, the watch isn't for emergencies you can see coming. It's for the people who will try to make her disappear when you're not in the room. Keep it charged." The hold music snapped off with a sharp click. A new voice came through the speaker, heavy, measured, and significantly older. "Mrs. Burke? This is Officer Reginald Ostracki with the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department. I'm currently stationed at the South Park store. Your daughter Eleanor is entirely safe. She is sitting right here with our store team lead, Kayla Brennan, at the guest services desk. We've been trying to reach your cell phone for the last 20 minutes. Are you in a position to come get her?" A massive wave of relief crashed over me, so violent it made my knees physically shake, but I forced my voice to remain completely level. "I am walking to my car right now, officer. I will be there in 20 minutes. "Take your time, Mrs. Burke," the officer replied, his tone softening with genuine empathy. Drive safely, she's completely calm. We got her an apple juice box and she's doing just fine. I hung up the phone, took one deep, stabilizing breath, and immediately dialed my grandfather, Edmund Holloway. He answered on the very first ring, his breathing heavy, as if he had been sitting by the phone expecting my call. I didn't waste time with a long, drawn-out explanation. I gave him the facts in 40 seconds flat. Vanessa took Ellie to Target, left her there intentionally, came back alone, and my mother laughed about it. My grandfather didn't shout. He didn't curse. The long, terrifying silence on the other end of the line was far more dangerous than any screaming match could ever be. When he finally spoke, his voice was ancient, cold, and rigid as iron. "Is the baby safe right now, Georgie?" "She's with a police officer at the customer service desk. Pop, pop. I'm on my way to get her." "Good," he said, and I could hear the distinct sound of a heavy desk drawer sliding open in his study. "Drive to your daughter, secure her, and then bring her straight to my house on Lake Norman. I am calling Walter Peaton right now. The 7th letter is in play. Walt will handle the kitchen." He hung up before I could ask him what a 7th letter meant. He hadn't ended a call that abruptly since the day my husband Reed died. I unlocked the powder room door, stepped out into the hallway, and walked back into the kitchen, where the two women were still sitting at the marble counter. They looked up, expecting tears, expecting a panicked mother begging for answers. Instead, they found a structural editor who had just removed them from the text. I walked into that kitchen with my car keys clutched tightly in my hand, my boots clicking against the hardwood floor with a steady, deliberate rhythm. Vanessa was casually picking through a bowl of green grapes on the counter, her expression completely detached, while my mother was calmly refilling her porcelain coffee cup. They both looked up, ready to witness the spectacular breakdown of the sturdy sister. They wanted a performance of grief, panic, and desperation. I didn't give them a single line. I stood at the edge of the kitchen island, looked directly into my mother's cold eyes, and spoke exactly one sentence. "Do not follow me. Do not call me, and I will be in touch when I am in touch." Vanessa rolled her eyes, letting out a soft, exasperated sigh as she popped another grape into her mouth. "Oh, Georgie, don't be so dramatic," she muttered, tossing her sleek ponytail. "She's completely fine. It was just a little lesson." I didn't offer a response. I walked out the heavy front door, closing it quietly and firmly behind me. The exact final way my grandmother Beatrice used to close doors when she was finished with a room. The 12-minute drive down Sharon Road to the South Park Target was the longest, most hyper-focused drive of my entire life. If you've ever had to compartmentalize your absolute terror just to get to your child, type the word focus in the comments right now. So, my grandfather stayed on the Bluetooth lines the entire time. He didn't offer empty platitudes or tell me everything was going to be all right. Instead, he kept my mind anchored in reality. "Tell me what kind of shoes she's wearing today, Georgie." His gravelly voice echoed through the car speakers. "White Mary Janes, pop pop," I said, my hands locked at 10 and 2 on the steering wheel. "The ones from Easter." "Good," he replied. "Keep driving, hands steady. I'm calling Walt now. Walt will be at your mother's house by 2 o'clock. When I walked through the automatic sliding glass doors of that Target, the bright commercial fluorescent lights hit me like a physical blow. The store was packed with typical Saturday shoppers. Parents pushing carts, toddlers whining in the toy aisle, couples browsing electronics. It felt so utterly normal, which only made the underlying cruelty of what my sister had done feel that much sharper. I hurried toward the guest services desk, and my heart instantly cracked open. There was a small circle of people gathered near the counter. 3 store employees, a female manager named Kayla, and a broad-shouldered police officer in a crisp uniform. Sitting in the middle of them on an oversized blue plastic chair was my 5-year-old daughter. Her little legs didn't even reach the edge of the seat, dangling in her daisy print dress and white Easter shoes. An empty apple juice box sat on the counter next to her. But it was what she was holding that made me stop in my tracks. She wasn't holding her favorite stuffed otter. She was clutching a simple, heavy wooden picture frame with both of her tiny hands, pressing it against her chest like a shield. The moment her eyes met mine, she didn't burst into tears and she didn't run to me. She stood up from the plastic chair slowly, her movements quiet and guarded, mirroring the exact way she had walked toward me in the hallway. The day her father died. She walked over, wrapped her small arms tightly around my hip, and pressed her soft face hard against my stomach. I knelt down on the cold, hard floor of that Target, wrapping my arms entirely around her small frame, breathing in the familiar scent of her baby shampoo and lavender lotion. For 8 seconds, neither of us said a word. Then, she looked up at me, her big brown eyes entirely too serious for a 5-year-old child. "I waited exactly where Auntie told me to, Mama," she whispered, her lip trembling just a fraction. "Was that the game? Did I lose?" My chest tightened so painfully I could barely breathe, but I forced a warm smile, gently cupping her face in my hands. "There was no game, baby girl. There was a mistake, but it wasn't your mistake. You did everything completely right. You were incredibly brave." She looked down, lifting the heavy walnut frame and pressing it into my hands. "Does Pop still want his birthday present?" It was a simple $12.99 frame with hinged corners, so the price tag still stuck to the back. She had spent her own saved cash on it because, as she told me, the dark wood was the exact color of Pop's kitchen table, and she wanted to put a picture of Grandma Beatrice inside for him. My sister had taken her to buy a gift, let her pick out something meaningful, and then walked away, leaving a child to think her love was a failure. Officer Ostrowski stepped forward, his expression deeply somber as he handed me a clipboard. "Mrs. Burke, I need you to sign this official incident report. It's not a criminal charge yet, but we initiated a code atom at 11:21 a.m. Our parking lot security cameras caught your mother's silver Audi Q5 exiting the premises at exactly 10:58 a.m. Your daughter was left completely unaccompanied in a major retail space for 23 minutes before a store employee intervened." I took the pen and signed my name on the dotted line. I watched as the officer officially logged the person responsible for the abandonment. Vanessa Carrington. Date of birth verified. Social security number pulled. Address recorded. As I tucked my copy of the report into my purse, a young employee named Joanna walked over, her eyes misting over with tears. "Mrs. Burke, I've worked here for 6 years, and I've found dozens of lost kids. None of them have ever been like your daughter." She sat there for hours, completely calm, refusing to let us call you because she didn't want to break the rules of her aunt's game. Whoever raised this little girl raised her right. I thanked Joanna, taking down her full name on a sticky note. But as we turned to leave, Officer Ostrowski caught my arm, his voice dropping low so Ellie couldn't hear. "Mrs. Burke, in 15 years of doing this, I've never met a 5-year-old who didn't cry when the police arrived. Whoever left her here today knew exactly how quiet she would be. That's the part that bothers me. That's calculated." I looked down at my daughter, who was holding my hand tightly, her small fingers laced through mine. The passive, accommodating version of Georgina Burke died right there on that Target floor. I guided her out to the car, buckled her securely into her car seat, and drove straight toward Lake Norman. The trap was set, and it was time to let the mastermind speak. While I was driving up Interstate 77 with Ellie sleeping peacefully in the back seat, my sister Vanessa and my mother Diane were busy constructing their own version of reality. They were deploying the exact survival tactics they had used for decades. Weaponized guilt wrapped in the soft, modern language of self-help. At exactly 1:02 p.m., my phone buzzed on the dashboard. It was a text from Vanessa. "It was just a joke gone wrong, sis. I would never hurt her, you know that." I didn't reply. At 1:45 p.m., another text arrived, this time from my mother. "Your sister is hysterical, Georgina. She tried to teach the child a lesson about wandering off, and now you are playing the victim. Call your sister." They truly believed that a few text messages and a bit of emotional pressure would make the sturdy daughter bend. They had no idea that at that very moment, my grandfather's attorney, Walter Peaton, was pulling his luxury sedan into my mother's gravel driveway in Myers Park. He wasn't there to negotiate. He was there as the executor of a dead woman's final wishes. Thanks to the detailed account Walt gave me later that evening, I can tell you exactly how the next 30 minutes played out in my mother's pristine living room. My mother opened the door, her face tightening when she saw Walt standing on the porch in a sharp charcoal suit, holding a small leather briefcase. My father, Philip, who had spent 40 years pretending he wasn't in the room whenever my mother was tearing me down, was standing in the kitchen doorway with his arms crossed. Vanessa was curled up on the designer sofa, clutching a tissue, ready to play the fragile, misunderstood sibling. "Walter," my mother said, her voice dripping with artificial warmth. "What is the meaning of this? Is my father all right?" Walt didn't smile. He walked past her, stepped into the center of the living room, and opened his briefcase. "Please sit down," he said, his voice entirely devoid of emotion. "I am here under direct instructions from Mrs. Beatrice Holloway, dated July of 2023. I do not represent you, Diane, and I do not represent your daughters. I represent Beatrice." He reached into his briefcase and pulled out an old, cheap burner phone, a device my grandmother had bought with cash a year before she died. He placed it directly in the center of the mahogany coffee table, pressed a single button, and stepped back. The voice that emerged from the tiny speaker was thinner than I remembered, raspy from the heavy cancer medications, but it was unmistakably my grandmother Beatrice. 20 months in the ground, and her voice materialized in that living room like a physical slap. "Diane, Vanessa," the recording began, the tone quiet but heavier than iron. "If you are hearing this audio, it means you have finally done what I always knew you would do. You have endangered or abandoned Georgie's child for the sake of your own vanity and greed. I saw the pattern decades ago. I watched how you treated Georgie, and I knew you would pass that cruelty down to Ellie. I told Edmund to prepare, and the legal papers are already executed. Diane, I loved you, but I saw who you were. Vanessa, sweetheart, there is a deep anger in you. Get help for it, because I cannot save you from yourself anymore." The recording cut out after exactly 38 seconds. The living room fell into a suffocating, breathless silence. Vanessa gasped, dropping her tissue, whilst my mother sat perfectly frozen, her eyes glued to the plastic burner phone. But Walt wasn't finished. "There is a second recording," he said calmly, reaching back into his briefcase and pulling out an iPhone. My grandmother's old personal phone. "Your mother was very specific about the order of these files." He pressed play. This recording was muffled. You could hear the distant, steady hum of a ceiling fan in the background. It had been recorded secretly in my grandmother's kitchen in June of 2022, just 3 months after my husband, Reed, had been killed. A young woman's voice was clearly audible, talking loudly on her cell phone from the adjacent dining room, entirely unaware that a digital microphone was running. It was Vanessa. "Honestly, Mom," Vanessa's recorded voice bragged, her tone dripping with casual malice. If something happens to Reed— oh, wait, lucky us, that already happened. If something happens to Georgina, or God forbid that annoying little brat Ellie, you and I inherit a massive piece of grandfather's estate. Right now, we get nothing. That kid is just a structural problem, standing between us and what is rightfully ours. We need to find a way to push them out of the picture. The audio tape ran for 4 minutes and 12 seconds. Walt let every single second of it echo through the high-ceilinged room. Vanessa stopped crying the moment her own voice filled the space. Her face turned a horrific ash-gray color, her breath coming in short, panicked, ragged gasps. My mother managed to whisper just one single word: Beatrice. Walt gave a slow, rigid nod. Yes, Diane, he said softly. She knew exactly who you were, and now it's time to talk about the paperwork. Walt didn't let them breathe. He unzipped the main compartment of his leather briefcase and began laying down 9 distinct pages of documents onto the mahogany table, placing them side by side with meticulous, geometric precision. He was laying out a trap that had been decades in the making, and he did it with the cold, unbothered detachment of an auditor reviewing a routine balance sheet. Diane, Vanessa, Walt began, his voice perfectly level. Your father is the sole grantor of the Holloway Revocable Living Trust, which was originally established in 2008 and has since been amended exactly 4 times. As the grantor, he possesses absolute, unilateral authority to modify, restructure, or entirely liquidate the trust during his lifetime. He did not require your consent for any of these changes, nor did he have any legal obligation to inform you of them. He has chosen to inform you today. He slid 2 thick, heavily stamped pages across the polished wood, stopping them right in front of my mother's trembling hands. Effective at 12:01 a.m. this morning, your monthly distributions from the trust are being systematically reduced by 16.5% each month for the next 6 months, after which they will permanently become 0. Furthermore, Vanessa, the commercial condo lease at the Cotswold Park address, which your grandfather has been paying on your behalf for the last 3 years, has been legally terminated. You have exactly 90 days to completely vacate the premises. Vanessa bolted upright, her eyes wide with absolute panic. He can't do that! That's my home! Mom, tell him he can't do that! He can, and he has, Walt countered smoothly, completely ignoring her outburst. But more importantly, the successor trustee role of the entire Holloway estate, a position designated to you, Diane, in the original 2008 filing, has been formally reassigned. Your eldest daughter, Georgina Burke, is now the sole successor trustee of this family's future. My mother's face completely drained of color. She put one palm flat on the table, leaning forward, trying to look past Walt to find her husband or her father. She looked at the empty chair at the head of the table. The chair where my grandmother had sat for 58 years, which now held a silver-framed photograph of Beatrice on her wedding day, staring directly back into the room. Dad, my mother cried out, her voice cracking as she looked toward the hallway. I know I've made mistakes. We were trying to teach the child a lesson. This is too much. Can't we just sit down without the lawyers? Just family like we used to? From the kitchen doorway, my father Philip did something I had never seen him do in my entire 34 years of life. He didn't offer an excuse. He didn't step in to pacify my mother or tell her it would be okay. He walked slowly into the hall, reached into the front closet, and took out his light spring jacket. He put it on, walked to the back door, and stepped out onto the screened patio, closing the door quietly behind him. He sat down on the wicker porch swing, turned his back to the glass, and refused to occupy the same room as his wife's unraveling malice. He was choosing the porch over her bed. He was choosing silence over her narrative. While they sat in that crumbling house, I spent my Saturday afternoon systematically stripping my mother and sister out of my life like bad syntax from a draft. I didn't yell, and I didn't send an angry text back. On Monday morning at 8:30 a.m., I walked into the front office of Eastover Elementary. The receptionist, Maureen Caldwell, looked up at me with knowing eyes. I handed her a freshly printed emergency contact form. "I need to permanently update my daughter's authorized pickup list, Maureen," I said quietly. "I am removing Diane Carrington and Vanessa Carrington. I am adding Edmund Holloway." Maureen took the paper, stamped it with an official blue ink block, and looked up. "Is there anything else you need from us, Mrs. Burke?" "Just for her to be safe," I said. "Your word is enough here," she replied. From there, I drove straight to Ellie's pediatrician's office, removing my mother's legal right to consent to medical treatment in my absence. When I got back to my small bungalow in Plaza Midwood, I sat at my kitchen counter and changed the digital keypad codes to my front door, my back door, and my garage. I changed my Wi-Fi password, a password I had given Vanessa 16 months prior under the false assumption that family could be trusted with access. The new password was 6 characters, a specific flower, and a year that mattered. Finally, I opened the Find My app on my phone. My mother had been tracking my location since Reed died in 2022 under the guise of keeping a lonely widow safe. I found her name, hovered my thumb over the red text, and tapped Confirm. A small banner popped up on my screen. "You are no longer sharing location with Diane Carrington." I knew her phone would flash with that exact notification on the morning of my grandfather's 81st birthday. I didn't change the timing. Let her count the seconds. On Tuesday evening, May 5, 2026, we gathered at my grandfather's house on Lake Norman to celebrate his 81st birthday. There were only 4 of us at the table. Pop, my daughter Ellie, myself, and Walt, who sat with us as a dear friend rather than a legal shield. We ate roasted chicken and a fresh lemon pie baked from my grandmother's original 1979 recipe by a neighbor who had loved her for 40 years. Ellie sat precisely on my grandfather's left side, just like Grandma Beatrice had whispered for her to do so long ago. With immense pride, she handed him the wrapped walnut frame we had rescued from the South Park Target. Inside, she had carefully placed a photograph of him and my grandmother from 1978. The year my own mother turned 15. Pop unwrapped it with slow, trembling fingers. He looked at the wood, then at the faded, glossy image, holding it tightly with both hands. "B," he whispered softly into the quiet room, looking toward the ceiling. "Look who picked this out for me." Then he turned to Ellie, his eyes shining with tears. "She had beautiful taste, your great-grandma. Just like you." He stood up, walked over to the living room bookshelf, and placed the frame on the very top shelf where my grandmother used to keep her Bible. A few days later, my mother called Walt's office directly, making the final desperate mistake of her social life. She requested a formal meeting with her father using the word negotiation. Walt cut her off instantly. "Diane, this is not a negotiation. Your father has agreed to exactly 1 meeting, and he will never host a second." That meeting took place on Saturday, May 9th, at 2:00 p.m. back at the lake house. When my mother and sister arrived in the silver Audi, they looked visibly diminished. Vanessa wore a heavy black dress from the funeral, her face pale and drawn. My father followed them inside, wearing a formal suit but no tie. The dining table was arranged with 4 chairs. The head of the table, Beatrice's seat, remained pulled out, holding her silver-framed wedding portrait facing the room. My father stopped dead in the tracks of the doorway, looking at the empty space. "Where is my seat, Walt?" he asked quietly. "Philip," Walt replied steadily. "Your father-in-law asked me to tell you that you are welcome to stay." or you are welcome to leave. There is a comfortable chair waiting for you on the porch." My father didn't hesitate. He took off his suit jacket, folded it carefully over his forearm, and walked straight through the kitchen onto the back porch. He sat down on the wicker chair facing the open water and remained there for the entire duration of the meeting. My grandfather hadn't exiled him. He had simply given him a choice that my mother never had. For the next hour, Walt laid out the absolute finality of the trust modifications. My mother wept for the first time since 1999, not out of remorse for her granddaughter, but out of sheer terror at a chair that represented her lost control. Vanessa stood silently in the hallway, unable to even face the room as her own recorded voice played back her financial greed. When the clock struck 3:30 p.m., the meeting ended. My grandfather spoke his final words to them. "Your mother saw both of you long before I did. I am just finishing what she started. Walt will mail the rest." They walked out to the Audi in a fractured formation. But my father didn't get back into the car with them. He sat on the porch for 10 more minutes, then walked down to the gravel drive and called a ride-share vehicle back to Charlotte. A few days later, he began his own quiet, profound rebellion. He spent 11 days working alone in my mother's garden, trying to save a dying rose of Sharon bush. On May 20th, realizing it was completely rotted, he cut it down, drove to a nursery in Pineville, and came home with a small magnolia tree in a black plastic pot, planting it entirely with his own hands. If you have made it this far with me, sit with this one final thought before you leave. Pull out your phone tonight. Check your school pickup lists. Check who has the digital keypad codes to your front door. Check exactly who has the legal right to make a decision in your name when you are no longer standing in the room. Then change what needs changing. The most loving thing my grandmother ever did was leave this earth when she was ready. The second most loving thing she did was prepare the legal boundaries she couldn't enforce out loud while she was alive. I am 34 years old, my daughter is 5, and my grandfather is 81. My grandmother has been gone for 20 months, yet she remains the largest, most protective presence in our family, stitched into every signed line that truly matters. We finished our breakfast on the porch, watching the morning sun reflect off the calm waters of Lake Norman. My father set his coffee cup down, looked across the table at me, and said softly, "Georgie." I looked back into his eyes, smiled on purpose, and said, "Dad." And for the first time in my life, that was the entire conversation.